Story 3. When I was 13, a new neighbor moved into the house next door to mine, which we share a driveway with. Our neighborhood is really close, and we like to have get-togethers and block parties, so we all got together and had a little celebration to welcome her. Immediately it became clear that she did not like my dad. A while later we find out that she's been telling our neighbors that my dad was inappropriate to her at the party. I know my dad would never act like that, but he isn't a native English speaker. He's Middle Eastern, which is relevant. And hey, maybe some sort of wire got crossed, and there was some kind of misunderstanding. So my dad goes to try and apologize to her. It does not go well, and she tells my dad to leave, which he promptly did. Then she put up the security cameras. They absolutely covered her house, getting views of pretty much every angle, including lots of shots of our shared drive. Whatever we thought, a lady has a right to put cameras in her house. Then the cops started showing up. She called them, claiming we had messed with her cameras, or that me and my friends were shining laser pointers into them. The cops would leave pretty quickly because the supposed crime involved a camera, which somehow hadn't captured any evidence of the supposed crime. Then she started claiming that we were poisoning her yard. She spent a lot of time in her lawn gardening and growing plants, but for some reason every 6 months or so, she'd cut everything down and start over. Anyways, the cops started coming asking about our supposed poisoning of her lawn, but they couldn't find any evidence. We didn't have any poison, her cameras hadn't picked anything up, and we had no effing motive to poison her lawn. So she started an inquest with the Department of Agriculture. A pesticide use investigator showed and interrogated us, then took samples from her yard. While that was going on, we had a few fun encounters with her. Once she bought a giant floodlight and pointed it into our windows in the middle of the night. The fire department had to come and unplug it. Another time, our dinner was interrupted when a massive hazmat truck came blaring down our street. Men in heavy gear poured out and charged into her house, and then, minutes later, disappointedly filed out. One guy came and told us that she had bought a Geiger counter and used it wrong, and had thought that we had irradiated her house. Finally, things came to a head when she sued us to get an order of protection. She claimed that my dad was a member of an Al-Qaeda sleeper cell intent on destroying her. She also claimed that he had used his skills as an engineer to develop a device that she referred to as a white ion laser, which would allow him to turn invisible and sneak into her house. She submitted 1 terabyte of film from her cameras, all of which was annotated with such incriminating evidence as "Squamish leaves the house," "Squamish enters the house." There were also tons of photos and notes. It was here that we discovered that her cameras were pointed into my bedroom and had been filming me for years. I was a young lad by this point, so there's probably video evidence of some pretty embarrassing teenage behavior out in the ether now. We later legally forced her to move the cameras, but she kept moving them back, so I just kept my blinds closed for the better part of a decade. During the trial, the Department of Agriculture report came back. It was determined that a crazy neighbor has poisoned her own lawn by over-fertilizing it. She received a fine for contaminating the groundwater. We obviously won the lawsuit and countersued her to get our own order of protection. We also had to legally get the files on us at the FI and CIA closed since she had reported us to both agencies. Despite losing the suit, she continued to live next to us, occasionally calling the police on us or suing us again. All things accounted for. The cops were called on us 37 times, we were sued 5 times, and of course there were the investigations with various federal agencies. It's now been 10 years, and she's finally moving out. Why, you might ask? Does she feel guilty for accusing us of crimes with no evidence for a decade? Had her paranoia finally driven her to move? No, she didn't pay her property taxes for 6 years, and her house got taken from her. She tried to sue the city on a bunch of occasions as well and failed. Womp womp. This is only a summary of the situation. There's tons more. I haven't even gotten into her kids, her husband's scam, the video she posted to YouTube of her dog dying, her faking a disability, and so much more. Story 4. I lived in a high-rise a few years ago, and the guy directly above me was pretty cool and enjoyable. Some highlights. One Sunday night, I was relaxing on my couch at about 10 p.m. I was reading a book when suddenly it sounded as if someone was shooting a gun through my ceiling. I went upstairs and knocked on his door and asked him to turn it down. He told me that the city's noise ordinance doesn't go into effect until 11 and basically to go blow myself. I told him it was causing an issue and that he needed to turn it down, and he walked back into his kitchen and came out with a sawed-off broomstick with a grip he'd fashioned of duct tape and threatened to beat me with it for asking him to turn it down. He ended up begrudgingly turning it down. I called the police on him because I could hear him beating up his girlfriend through my ceiling. They never got there in time, and she never told them that he had hit her, so they never did anything. I'm about 90% sure that he tried to break into my apartment one day while I was out. He had stuck his head in my door when there was a plumbing issue with his tub drain leaking and damaging my bathroom ceiling. His eyes lit up when he saw that my place was nice. Shortly thereafter, someone tried to break into my place by going through the lock cylinder. I only noticed because it broke my lock, and I couldn't get into my apartment at 3 a.m. when I got home. I got a new deadbolt immediately. One morning, I was in the shower getting ready for work when water started pouring into my bathroom. I mean water blasting out of my sconce, shower tiles turning brown from being waterlogged, etc. I threw on shorts and ran down to the office. No one was there. I went to the maintenance office. Empty. I called every number for the company I was renting from. No one answered. I went to the apartment above me where this was coming from. No one answered. By the time I got back to my place, the entire bathroom ceiling had collapsed, and I had water damage visible in 2 other rooms and a whole hallway. I later found out that his junkie girlfriend had nodded off while filling the bathtub to do laundry. There was a giant goddamn laundry room in the basement, and the water was running full blast for a while as it overflowed. She destroyed my apartment and damaged a couple $1,000s worth of my stuff. She admitted to exactly what had happened. He came home and tried to talk his way out of it. The maintenance guy shut him down and told him he knew what had actually happened and that he was basically boned. He then made a throat-slashing gesture at me in view of the head of maintenance. He got evicted as a result of the damage she did and the fact that he threatened to murder me by cutting my throat. He blamed me for his eviction, so he started vandalizing my car. He kicked off the side window. He slashed a tire 2 different times. He threatened to kill me one time when I saw him in a bodega in the neighborhood because he moved directly across the street when he got thrown out. F you, Eddie, you piece of garbage. Story 5. There's a particular type of person who seems to feel like they're the only thing standing between society and complete collapse, and about 7 years ago, my downstairs neighbor was one of them. She was aloof and paranoid, and she'd imagine threats from almost everywhere, which made the fact that she thought of herself as some kind of secret agent all the more annoying. Said neighbor was always trying to find ways of getting me, and anyone else whom she thought of as suspicious, to move out of the building. She'd stage loud telephone calls with headquarters about the alarming behavior of the other tenants, like my tendency to get home after 9 in the evening, which was clearly scandalous, and frequently yell at the people who'd stand on the corner to smoke. On one occasion, I heard her shouting at someone over the placement of a flower pot in their window, which was obviously an indication that they were selling drugs. Then, one afternoon, I found an official notice taped to a wall in the stairwell. It was perhaps the most ridiculous attempt at a government-sponsored document that I'd ever seen, and I'm including the time that my friend Jonathan, then 9 years old, made a flyer for bodyguard services. The atrocious grammar, poorly photoshopped seal, and distinct absence of any legitimate contact information made the thing about as realistic as a scene from NCIS. Furthermore, the reference to the past 2 years seemed to indicate me as her primary target, since I was, as far as I knew, the only resident who had been there for less time than that. Still, since the notice was clearly meant to scare someone, I decided to return the favor by taking a page out of my neighbor's own playbook. This led me to stand outside of her apartment while staging my own fake phone call. You should see the notice. It's terrible. Hi, yeah, it's like they didn't know that impersonating a federal official is a felony. Anyway, the real FBI are on their way, and they're going to dust for fingerprints. Whoever made that notice is looking at a lot of jail time. I went back inside my apartment after that, and within seconds, I heard my neighbor's door open. There was the sound of hurried footsteps rushing towards the stairwell, followed by an equally hurried retreat. When I went out to check 5 minutes later, the notice was gone. I've since moved away, but for the rest of the time that I lived there, the lady never bothered me again. Story 6. 3 brothers in their 60s who would drink whiskey in their yard all day. They called code enforcement on everyone constantly, put signs in the yard with curse words all over them, sold drugs to kids, tried to stab a neighbor, tried to hit another neighbor with a car, would drink and drive and hit cars parked on the street, put trash and furniture in the middle of the road and block it, would scream insults at people minding their own business, threatened to kick underage girls in the C***ants when they walked by, threw eggs at people's cars, shot a puppy in someone's backyard, buried car batteries in their yard, which caused a weird streak of residue to form in the road, would go into people's backyards when they weren't home and turn on their hoses so sometimes they would run for days without anyone noticing, punched a man with physical disabilities and broke his glasses, streaked when there were kids around, drunkenly swung knives in the air, beat their kids in the yard, hit their wives and girlfriends in the yard, would randomly stand in the street in front of their house and direct traffic for no reason, pretended to commit suicide on front of a group of kids, threatened to burn down people's houses, and put screws and nails behind the tires of people's parked cars. What's your worst neighbor ever story? Story 1. We had next-door neighbors who had kids that were a little rowdy, but nothing too bad. Then one of the parents died, and the kids went incredibly wild. Over the next few years, we had a number of problems, including graffiti spray painted on the house, glass and nails left in a line on our driveway, a full can of ginger ale thrown through our window, dog shit thrown at the house, and condoms filled with corn syrup and flour launched at our house. In addition, the kids started dealing drugs out of the house, and we had to deal with a massive increase of noise as they had large parties every weekend and were sitting on the front porch screaming obscenities at each other almost every weekday. We tried calling the cops when we were hit, and the cops were aware of the kids from other calls in the neighborhood. Unfortunately, their mother covered for them and would apologize to us privately after the cops left. All the cops could do was give them warnings. We finally broke down and set up cameras around the entire outside of the house and installed them when the kids were there and watching. They saw everyone go up and saw us check and remove all blind spots. The moment they saw that they'd be on camera if they tried any of this again, the problems immediately stopped. Even the dealing moved somewhere else. It's been mostly peace and quiet, with a few exceptions, ever since. Story 2. Our neighbors hated us after we got an extension built with full permission, and the council rejected their objections for not having enough light, because they'd converted the garage into a dining room with windows without permission. By mutual agreement, we removed the front part of the hedges because my parents felt so bad that they wanted to do something for them. Neighbors decided to sue us and claim the entire boundary where the hedges were removed for themselves. Our houses were built 50 years apart, and our house had its own hedges and was a corner house before theirs was built. We also have proof of how the space looked before the extension was built and hedges removed, and the way it was built, most of it belonged to us from the start. I say sue because they started this problem to begin with and wanted legal action, but refused to get a solicitor on the grounds of why should I gtas odlicitr, which causeds. So we got a solicitor ourselves, because my mum had been assaulted a few times and they were building walls and placing objects on the disputed space, despite numerous police warnings. I've been assaulted myself. The wife has been charged. She's tried to run my mum over with her car before. We decided it was time to resolve it formally. It's been 3 years since this started. We're going through our solicitor and it's taking a long time, but we're getting there. We've been told to do absolutely nothing and just report and document everything, which is what we've done. We tried to resolve it ourselves, but it ended in assault, so we won't even go near them. They won't cooperate because they believe they did nothing wrong. Every week there is some sort of commotion and we'll get harassed in some way. On the other hand, our neighbors on the other side of us are absolute angels, and the elderly missus gave my mum some berries last week to make jam from.